So, okay, we can go back a little. So I'm Noah, and I think some of you know me here. So basically, our team basically recently is working with Moda on building on a couple of series of different experimentations on decentralized IDs. And so we're here basically. Clement gave a very detailed talk about how the technical side work, how the standard side work. Mine wouldn't be mostly about that. Mine will be how we think about the future of identities, how we think about the future of decentralized identities in a sense. So I do want to talk a little bit about how people define decentralized IDs, because there are a lot of different narratives around decentralized IDs. From Clement's world, from traditional ID world, people talk about decentralized IDs with self-sovereign identity, with all this data ownership, which is more closer to the European narratives. That's one kind of narratives. There's also the narratives from the Web3 space, right? Which is coming from a Sybil-resistant kind of identity solutions, how we can best represent ourselves as human beings, how we do proof of humanity, so resources can come to every single person in a very fair way. And there's also the kind of narrative that's a lot more philosophical. The sociologists, the economists talk about identities in a more plural, more relational sense, in a sense that identity is basically your identity doesn't exist. If not about the connections around you, if it's not about relationships around you, if not about the actions you take in this world. So there are a lot of different narratives coming together into this DID, decentralized ID space, which is all coming to the same space. There are overlaps, but they're not completely the same. And it's helpful to clarify because then we have context of what kind of space, what kind of scenarios that we're operating with these DID solutions. And to give more context, those were the current scenarios and the current narratives, right? And I'll give you also a bit of history in the past 100 years. Hannah Arendt basically talked about IDs as the right to have rights. So she's talking about this in a more context of an individual in a political community. How do you, to receive rights from the government, how do you have, we have obligations as well, right? So the ID, the purpose and the role of an ID is to form that relationship with the government. And so that's like 80 years ago, that was the definition. And World Bank, UN, gave this 2030, every single person on this earth has to have legal identity. And you can see the narrative changes a bit. It becomes basic human rights somehow, right? So it changes a little bit. And then it goes to the Web3 space. We have a lot more different, we talk about data ownership, we talk about privacy and all this. So as you can see, identity is not a fixed concept. Identity is a product, is a rendition of the context and the values that we have in our era and in our time. So that begs the question of what context, what values are basically shaping our identity systems for the future. Why do we need the next ID system? Why do we need decentralized ID systems? So a couple of different global contexts. So the first one, of course, privacy, right? GDPR is a very good movement. However, it might not be enough. We might need something more fundamental that's embedded in our identity systems to better protect our data, to better protect our privacy. So that is certainly one trend, one demand that's shaping the future of identities. The second one, I don't need to talk about AI disinformation. Everybody here is probably familiar with that front. But but I'll talk about a story. So there were two researchers, maybe 6 years ago. This is pre-ChatGPT, right? So they did a research which sent 7,000 emails to around 1,000 legislators. Half of them are written by AI, half of them are written by human beings. The legislators have no idea which are from AI, which are from, and So, and if you think about it, now everyone can send 7,000 emails to legislators. So under this context, that directly affects our democracy, right? That directly affects how the society actually works directly. So that is a big problem. How do we better represent ourselves as human beings, also as citizens? So that is a problem. The third one is the identity plight of international refugees. So this is a big problem because this doesn't seem that immediate for all of us. And when we look at the word refugees, we think about war, we think about political refugees. But the number is that by 2050, there will be 2 billion refugees in the world because of climate change, because people are forced to move away from where they're staying, forced to move away from their homes. So how do we, under these extreme conditions, how do we help them to preserve the power to verify who they are? Because if you know a thing or two about refugee camps, when people cannot identify themselves, cannot verify who they are, when they go into refugee camps, it's not staying there for a couple of days, a couple of weeks, it's actually years and decades. Some people even stay there for 20 years. So that is also a huge problem that's shaping the world of identities. And that is also why the World Bank, United Nations think this is a very important question that we need to resolve. The last one, of course, there are a lot of technological promises, ZKs, blockchain, decentralized solutions that the blockchain community is bringing to the conversation. There are a lot of possibilities that we can build, as well as digital democracy, right? There are so many different kinds of, whether it be AI governance or not, the divided society needs to come together and form consensus somehow, and that requires a base layer of fundamental and very solid identity systems. So these are the context. So given those contexts, I think there are three things that we need to talk about when we talk about decentralized identities or the next identity system. First of all, we of course need to talk about control, right? Can we control our identity? Can we control the data that we own? And the reason we need control, given if in extreme circumstances, if we need to move out of our country, if war happens somehow, if there are some kind of crisis, control is really important. We still need to be able to verify ourselves, even if the centralized servers that is containing all of our identity are destroyed somehow, somewhere somehow, right? And privacy is also a very important thing. Some of you probably heard of this story as well. So when Russia invades Ukraine, they took a little part of Ukraine, and basically they ran a referendum there, right? And people go, and they need people to go and vote. But when they're voting, there are armed forces standing right next to the voting booth. So that is not privacy, right? That is not the right to basically being able to voice your opinions freely. So that kind of privacy, or even more, is something we must talk about. And the third one is interoperability. So I'm quoting the founders of Ethereum attestation service. So basically what they do, what they talked about is the DID systems that we're building up until so far are kind of like glorified, siloed, centralized identity systems because they need people to adopt their system, going to use their credential standards to form their own identities. But those credentials is very hard to move to other places. So we need some kind of interoperable standards like maybe ES and others to make sure that wherever we bring our actions, wherever we bring our credentials, those can be represented in different formats of identity. So those are the things that we're definitely looking at. So of course, there are myriads of different examples, myriads of different DID initiatives in the world right now. Some focus more on privacy, some focus more on certain scenarios. But all of these scenarios, all of these ID systems are built for a certain context, right? They have their strong suits and they have their weaknesses. The point is not that we need to adopt, there's not going to be a one single identity standard in the future. It's about we having a lot of different identities that can interoperable with each other. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, next. Okay, the Taiwan context. So, So what drives the ID adoptions? So as you can imagine, the IDs probably will be a new form of ID systems. And it takes some attractions or it takes some fear for people to convert into a new ID system because that's the entry barrier, right? So we talked to some companies who are running DID solutions, building DID solutions on the ground. When they talk to their users about the core key factor, the core advantages of DIDs, including control, including privacy, it's actually very hard in a relatively peaceful society to convert users, to get them to jump on to a new ID system. Although that people still think that's very important, but to converting people to this new system is relatively hard. And when we talk about interoperability, if interoperability is more about network effects, right? If you have more scenarios that can build up on it, if you have more people that can build up on it, then it becomes an attraction. But to get to that point, there are certain steps we need to take. There are a long way to go. So of course, it's a little hard for us to push forward a new ID systems, especially not forcefully in Taiwan, especially if it's opt-in. W3C standard, they suggested many different scenarios that we can adopt. These scenarios are all very logical. But on the other side, when it comes to a local context, it may not be that practical because the adoption, dynamic of that adoption, how people are going to use this. For example, they're basically EIDAS and their DID standard is pushing forward their college certificates as a DID credential, right? And that is, of course, one scenario that makes perfect sense. However, if you only have a couple of schools jumping on board using these credentials, then that's not enough network effect for the future employers to look at this and say, okay, you're going to be employed, right? So these are the things that we're basically looking at. What are the starting points for DID solutions like the ones in Taiwan can start? So we look at a couple of, there are two interesting contexts in Taiwan that may fit the narratives of DIDs. The first one is a little darker, so it is the political struggle of Taiwan. We all know, we all understand that there is always the possibility of a potential war that can be a problem in Taiwan. I won't go into the political side, of course, but on the other side, on the brighter side, there's very vibrant civic participation in Taiwan. There's very vibrant policy deliberation processes that's being done in Taiwan. There's very vibrant open source communities like LoveZero in Taiwan. So those are the things that we can build upon and we can build more experience upon. And so the directions, the strategies that we're employing, on one side, of course, we're trying to build resilience into decentralized ID systems or Taiwanese ID systems but how to do that, of course, is a problem we'll talk about it in a bit. But how do we build resilience into ID systems? So when crises come, when something happens, we can preserve a certain rights that we value. And on the other hand, how might we supercharge the existing democratic these experiments, social experiments in Taiwan that's already ongoing, that's already gotten a lot of attention internationally. How do we continue to lead on that front? Because no matter what it is, it can be conjunctive funding, it can be conjunctive voting, collusion-resistant experiment, it can also be AI deliberation platforms. All of these requires a very fundamental layer of a sound ID system for all of these systems to work. So how might we achieve that? So let me give you two examples. So on one side, the demand and the need for example, control and privacy as mentioned in peaceful times, people don't convert over that. People care about those, but people don't convert as much. But those needs will rise when crisis happen, right? So how might we build a system to onboard all the traditional identity formats into a decentralized formats at that moment, given that time window, securely and fastly. So basically, we can infuse resilience into everyone's identity systems. So the design will be trying to get as much identity systems on board to be in a decentralized way. Another is how do we build this system to make sure that the transfer is fast enough, is secure enough, so when something happens, then we can cope with. And this kind of system also is, like I said, the global situation of refugees, of people moving out of their country, all of these can be a system that those situations can adopt as well. On the other hand, AI-powered deliberation platform, if in case you guys don't know what this is, so it's, for example, citizens given their opinions on a political policy, and then these opinions gets grouped, gets clustered into different clusters. And so we have a big representation of what the community or what the society think about a specific issue. And so we can find a way to reach consensus somehow. And that, if the fundamental layer, if the AI, if the IDs, some of the IDs are represented by AI, some of the IDs are represented by people who are not from this country, then it becomes a problem because that is not a representation of what the society thinks, right? So these are the things that we're thinking about, and if we do more of these democratic experiments based on DIDs, then we have more social experience stories to tell and more implementation of how DIDs can work in our real society. So basically, that's the whole presentation. And my point is that DIDs it's probably not one system, right? DIDs, it should be based on local context, based on local need. There will be myriads of ID systems that will sprung up and serve different scenarios. However, the point is, how do all of these different ID systems, how do these credentials work across different boards so we can bring our credential, we can bring our identities to different formats, to different scenarios. How does the interoperability work? And build an ID ecosystem instead of an ID system. So that will be my presentation. Thank you.